Good evening. Welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns Hour here on YouTube and Periscope. It is Monday, February 11th, 2019. Hope you all had a great weekend. Before we get started, let's do a little housekeeping. You guys know that live streams happen Monday nights at 8, Friday nights at 8:30. And let's make it explicitly clear up front. This is me unfiltered. And me unfiltered is pretty dirty. So, for those of you who are worried about it, it's NSFW here, so either put on the headphones or tell the kids to leave the room. I got scolded by a new listener over the weekend about that, and I think it's high time I either cleaned up my language or informed everybody up front of where we're going to go during the evening. So, let's do that. So, yes, Monday nights 8. As we are now, Friday nights 8:30. So tonight, we're going to talk about Matteo Salvini because, boy, is he shaking things up. So over the weekend, and good evening to everybody who's shown up, and if you're watching on Periscope and you want to partake of the conversation, please pop on over to YouTube because I can't see the chat. I'm doing this through both. I'm doing this through Restream, but Restream's comments aren't coming through the chat anymore, so I only have the YouTube chat up as of right now. All right, so let's get started. Let's talk about Matteo Salvini. You know, you guys know that the Salvini is one of my favorite people, not just because he's an Italian. That's that's just goes without saying, right? It's that over the weekend he and his partner in crime. No, I don't expect to get, just as an aside to everybody who's commenting, I don't expect to get bad tonight. It's just that I need to remind everybody and I need to warn people up front that it could go that route depending on the evening. And I don't, tonight I may keep it completely clean. Friday night I may swear like a sailor. So, caveat emptor, you've been forewarned. All right. But back to Salvini, another hot-headed Italian. Salvini is possibly right now my favorite politician in the world. He's right up there with Vladimir Putin. But, Putin has actually done things at this point. Salvini has only kind of walked the walk so far. But I think he's absolutely headed in the right direction. And it could get very ugly for him very quickly, given where he's gone in the last 48 hours, or at least 72 hours. Over the weekend, he and his partner in crime, five-star leader Luigi Di Maio, went after the Bank of Italy. Now, I've read two different versions of what they said, two different interpretations of what they said, but the upshot is that they're both incredibly upset with the Bank of Italy and their stock market, or the equivalent of their SEC, for not keeping close tabs on and not doing their job as regulators and safeguarding the Italian economy and savers within the Italian banking system. Remember that the European Union has incredibly powerful bail-in rules. Now, bail-ins are the opposite of bailouts. When the bank gets in trouble, as opposed to bailing them out with public money, you bail them in with public money. It just happens to be the savings of the people who place their money in the bank. Because this is these are long-standing rules in effect that courts have always adjudicated that. This is to the best of my knowledge, and you're more than welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, but that depositors in most banks are unsecured creditors, and that the bondholders of the bank have to be paid off first in any bankruptcy, and then the depositors will get made, won't necessarily get made whole, which is part of the reason why we have FDIC insurance here in the United States. It's part of the reason, as Gary North argued years ago over at LouRockwell.com, to say that what ended the Great Depression was the creation of FDIC insurance, which brought some level of confidence back to the banking system because there was a government backstop for your money. During the height of the Great Depression, people trusted banks less than they trust politicians today. So Voice is a little shaky tonight, so I'm going to be drinking a fair amount of tea, just so you know. So so looking at what Di Maio and Salvini were doing over the weekend by saying, you know, everybody in charge at both of these establishments, the Bank of Italy and Consob, which is the Italian equivalent of the SEC, both of them need to all be fired and people need to be thrown in jail for malfeasance and for not doing their job as regulators. Now, this, in and of itself, is usually enough to get you killed. And then, yes, I do, Stoyanovich, I do mean government-endorsed robbery. That's what a bail-in is, a la Cyprus back in 2014. The EU tested its bail-in rules in Cyprus, and they did it. And you know why they did it in Cyprus, Stoyanovich? They did it in Cyprus because most of the money that they were collecting was from Russian oligarchs. And yeah, they gave everybody warning, and then they froze all the Russian accounts, and they just stole all their money after they, you know, it was so. All language options are on the table all the time. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that all language options are on the table all the time. As we grow, it's going to become more important. And it's just important that I keep that in mind so that people know that this is me unfiltered. So, Salvini and Di Maio start with that over the weekend. And then I just read on Zero Hedge before I started. I'm like, you know, I worked my ass off all day today, and I worked my ass off yesterday getting the latest issue of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter out the door, which I've gotten, interestingly enough, I've gotten really positive feedback on. And thank you to all the new subscribers and the new patrons that showed up in the last 24 hours. You all are fucking phenomenal, and I really appreciate it. So this afternoon at around 4 o'clock or so, I'm like, I'm done. I'm checking out. I watched a movie with Camille and Sophie, and then I played World of Warcraft until about 15 minutes ago, and I'm like, oh shit, I better prep for. I already know I'm going to talk about Salvini, and I better at least prep for the show, and yada yada yada. So what do I see at the top of Zero Hedge? But Salvini proposes seizing control of Italy's gold reserves from the central bank. So he not only does he go after the Bank of Italy and proposes that they all be fired and then thrown in jail for malfeasance, but now he and the rest of the league want to reiterate that the gold that is Italy's sovereign reserves are owned by Italy and the people of Italy. Because I was reading, as I was going through all this, and as I was reading that article, and this is some very interesting stuff about why they're going this route. Очень хорошо. Exactly. I can read that. I know that's like all the Russian I know. That and I know Nemnoga. I know a little bit of Russian. So Eurosceptic lawmaker Claudio Borgi of the League adds to an already tense relationship between the Bank of Italy and the coalition government. I'm just going to read this stuff out because you guys really have to hear this. It's also sparked criticism from opposition politicians. What a shock. And the national media, who argue that it may allow the government to raid the gold reserves to fund spending promises. Bullshit. By the way, bullshit. Told you. See, I'm trying to be nice here. The bill only aims at making clear that the gold belongs to the state and not to the government to spend. So the difference between the Italian state as a sovereign entity as opposed to the government that actually does the business of the state. It's a distinction, I guess, that exists in parliamentary systems like they have in Europe. But it's important to understand that the Bank of Italy, you know, the money, the gold was turned over to the Bank of Italy as a lot of the same way that our sovereign gold was turned over to the Federal Reserve, right? And but here's the problem, which is that I was reading some of the comments, because the comments on Zero Hedge are always the best part, right? Well, at least most of the time. Which is that a lot of the gold, the problem has been that the Bank of Italy was created out of the shares of the Bank of Italy were owned by all the major banks of Italy, and they were all state banks at one point in the past. And then all those banks have been privatized over the last generation or so and sold off to investors. So the Bank of Italy is now, like the Federal Reserve here in the United States, is effectively privately owned. So who owns the gold? BlackRock? Or the people of Italy? And that's what this is about. You know, and you dig down far enough and you find out the truth. The other truth is that half of Italy's gold is held at, under the Mariner Eccles building in New York City. Good luck getting that back. Because in the same way that Germany's been struggling to get their gold back from the United States, and you know, Chavez got his gold back and then 6 months later came down with stage 4 throat cancer. Yeah. So it's really very interesting. It is absolutely one of those things that you really need to think about carefully. Is that's why they're doing this. That's why they're going after it. Okay, they want to make sure that Parliament is in charge of. Right? No, the Bank of Italy is apparently privately owned, or at the very least, partially privately owned. Some of it has been privatized. That the banks that were the original shareholders in the Bank of Italy have been since privatized and then sold on the open market. So who are the major shareholders of these banks, and then who actually controls the gold? As far as Salvini is concerned, that's unacceptable. That gold is the Italian people's. That you don't just get to privatize the bank, the central bank, and I guess let them have the gold, and let them have the gold as part of the asset, because it's on their balance sheet, right? Mark to market, even. So now, why would Salvini want the gold reserves? Why would he want it reiterated and made abundantly clear in a legally binding way, in some way, that the sovereign gold reserves of Italy are the property of the state and not the Bank of Italy? Because if you're thinking about playing the long game. Now, Beppe Grillo apparently is involved in, hey, why don't we spend this money and do the right thing with it? Why should Grillo, being the lefty that he is, says, why do the people have to sell their necklaces to make ends meet and not the state? I agree with him at a certain level. I certainly do. But I absolutely agree with him philosophically. But here's the big problem. The big problem, you have to go through the process of first start drilling down farther and going and start looking at privately issued currency or privately held money, which is sovereign. So part of it is owned by, the very little of the actual gold reserves are held at the Bank of Italy. Most of them are held by somebody else who has far more power than the Bank of Italy does. Federal Reserve, the Vatican, yada yada yada. So never in a million years, never think that that's not ownership isn't 9/10 of the law, because it absolutely is. And as countries, get wise to the fact that it's get wise to the fact that the current state of affairs around the world is very, very metastable. In order for trust is breaking down all across all the political and institutional order, not just between us and our governments, but between governments themselves. And so it's really important to see this for what it is. There's going to come a point where after this is settled, quote unquote, in some way, expect Salvini et al. To ask for repatriation at some point. And if they do, that's another big dog whistle that they don't, while they are willing to play the game of trying to reform the EU from within, because that's the big game here, right? All of this, again, is setting up for the European parliamentary elections in May. Okay? I was reading Martin Armstrong this morning, and he reminded everybody that his next World Economic Conference, WEC Forum, is going to be in Rome in May. He does this on purpose, because his computer's telling him that this is where the hotspot's going to be. This is where the crisis point's going to be. So he sends everybody to Rome, says, oh, look, this is ground zero for what's happening here. And that's his big dog whistle. I just think it's funny. I think it's interesting. And to tell you everything you need to know sometimes, it's almost like the big leading indicators. Like, where's Martin going to hold his next conference? You know, so, you know, if you're not a high-level subscriber over there, which I'm not, then there it is. So, European parliamentary elections in May are the big thing. We've been you know, speaking to this point for weeks now, for months, because you can't understate the moves that Salvini has been making. Yes, that the moves that Salvini's been making have been all in service of maximizing the political damage he can do between now and May. So you lay low for a while Brexit is on the scene, is the big story. You agree to you cave a little bit on the budget talks with the EU, you get them off your back for a little while, and you let them go deal with Brexit, right? You got yellow vests in London, in London, and all over France. Eventually you're going to have them in London too. Right? And Brussels has enough to deal with. They don't need the Italians making things worse. So the Italians back off for a little while, support the false narrative that the ECB has everything under control. Once the ECB stops buying Italian debt, which they apparently have stopped doing, the free market came in and started buying Italian debt. The Italians have run a couple of massively successful bond auctions for the first time in over a year. Recently, Italian bond yields are down, and that's counterintuitive, and it's actually something at first I was like, that doesn't make any sense, but now I think about it, of course it makes sense. When you are the guy on the hook for the debt going bad, when you have an incentive to keep the debt from failing, and you'll support the market for a little while, and you'll come in and you'll buy that shit just to make sure that your other holdings don't go bad. You're kind of doubling down on suck because you don't have any other options. And we've seen this before. We saw this in the primary dealers here in the United States post Lehman Brothers. Same kind of thing happened, right? Didn't last. Eventually, you know, they wound up selling it at lower prices. But so and North on 60, I'm going to get to your point in a minute. So when you stop to really think it all the way through, it's obvious that what Salvini is playing for here is he's playing the strategy that I outlined back in, it was like September or October of 2017, when he first really hit the scene. And I identified what the situation was, which was that Berlusconi was acting as a stalking horse for the establishment in the same way that Martin Schulz was in Germany. So Martin Schulz ran a terrible campaign as leader of the SPD to ensure that Angela Merkel would win. They effectively said, well, look, we can't have, we can't have the minor parties getting a significant bump. So we're going to set up a false negative, and we're going to run a really bad candidate for the SPD and hope that will prop Merkel's numbers up, because no one will run to the Greens or AFD or the Free Democrats or anything else. It didn't work. Schulz ran a terrible campaign. Merkel's numbers collapsed. His numbers collapsed, and we have cartel hell over in Germany. Well, the changes to the Italian election rules, which allowed parties to campaign together. So we could have Forza Italia and the League. And at the time, that was done in order for the League to piggyback onto Forza Italia and then use that as a means by which to form a cartel with the Democrats or whatever, and Salvini was supposed to be the third guy or maybe the fourth guy in that coalition. And that's why Mattarella dissolved parliament 2 months early, pulled elections up because they were scared to death of Five Star. What they should have been scared of was the League, because they exploded, and they started exploding, and Salvini started exploding almost immediately. once he started campaigning for all of Italy, once they rebranded themselves from the Northern League to the League, once that happened, it became very obvious to everybody in Italy that this is what they wanted. They wanted the Eurosceptic parties. But he soft-pedaled, leaving the euro and all this stuff. And I'm getting to the ultimate point here, because the goal, what I said back then was he needs to, they both need to soft-pedal any talk of Italy and just criticize the EU, deal with immigration, deal with all these other issues, deal with all the populist issues, and get the votes. And then start working on the EU politically and start turning them into the bad guy. Because the polls were nowhere, were nowhere positive enough for them to then make the radical move to Italy. It was never going to happen in, March of 2018. Where it's going to happen is in March of 2020 or 2021. So that's the game that Salvini's playing. And he's step by step trying to convince the Italian people that there is no way to deal with Brussels. And he's allowing at every opportunity the Brits to show the Italians what the score is. And then he turns around and opens up some other can of worms, which should get them outraged. And this is pure populism on his part. And it's absolutely the right thing to do. Yeah, Forza Italia was Berlusconi. And so I just figured he was smart to do that. And I said on the eve of the Italian elections, if they upside surprise, if they get anything over 15%, and they are the dominant one in the coalition between in that group between Forza Italia and the League, right? If the League, which was polling below Forza Italia, if that reversed in the final vote, which is exactly what happened, and it was 2 points higher than any poll expected it to be, then Salvini would all of a sudden have all the power in the world. And he went from 17% to fucking 40% in 7 months. They're polling nearly 40% right now, the League is. So I had my doubts about him for a little while. I wasn't quite sure, but you always have to remain skeptical about somebody that you don't really know until you see them battle tested, because you don't know. And he's done everything tactically exactly the way he should have. And I've been incredibly impressed with him. And his political acumen is fantastic. It's better than Trump's, goddammit. They shouldn't be like blowing up statues of God Emperor Trump in Rome. We should be blowing up statues of God Emperor Salvini here in the United States. So at the end of the day, I'm watching this play out, and I find it great. So now he's now with each of these stepwise moves, the budget was well played, immigration was well played, all of this stuff was really well played, right? And at every turn, he's put them on their back foot. He's known when to push and when to back off. I mean, it's like watching a Grand Prix driver. It's really, really good. And so when I saw them go after the central bank this weekend, I'm like, oh, they picked the exact right time to do this, because the fear over a hard Brexit is really starting to percolate now. It's really starting to get like, everybody's panties are in a twist now. They don't know what the fuck to do. They don't have a fucking plan B. It's great. No one ever has a plan B, by the way. Okay? None of these politicians ever have a plan B. They don't. Why would they? Why would they have a plan B? They were chosen by God. Or the people, as far as they were concerned. They were chosen by God to lead the benighted, rabble. They're the philosopher king. They're the God emperor. It's like it's silly, and it's just hubris and narcissism, and they think they have power, and then they use it, and then when they find out that the power doesn't work, then they don't know what to do. Then they don't have a plan B. What they do is they do the same thing they did before. That's their plan B. More. So, yeah, Salvini saw Stoyanovich. So Salvini saw how Cyprus and Greece were treated. So why would the EU change its tactics? Exactly. The Greeks didn't have the nerve to call the EU's bluff. Varoufakis has been over this 1,000 times, and he's absolutely right. It's only when he starts going off on, his Marxist rants that I then, turn the button. Then I just, click the off button and move on with my life. The Italian foreign minister has said Russian sanctions are causing huge damage to the Italian economy. Any chance Italy vetoes the sanctions? Dragan, I'm going to get to that. That's a very good point. It's something we need to discuss. But let me finish connecting the dots, and then I'm going to answer that one for you. It really is a good question because it's been something on my mind because I have an order of operations of how this has to play out before they can do so. Because we have a clue as to what they're going to do because we saw them tell the Council of Foreign veto the Council of Foreign Ministers statement about Venezuela. Right? That was the Italians. That's your key. They're already preparing to do. They're already laying the groundwork. That was their dog whistle to say, oh, by the way, Russian sanctions are on the table. Germany. Because we don't fucking give a shit about you anymore. We're coming after you, Merkel. Seriously. So, but he has to build an immense base of Euroscepticism within the Italian population. He has to castigate the EU as the evil overlord. To get ready for the European parliamentary elections, where you'll likely see Eurosceptic parties across Europe outpoll. They'll outperform their poll numbers. They generally do. It's like when you've got this, think about it. If we were members of the European Union here in the United States, your average libertarian candidate in a three-way race in an important state will get between 1% and 3% of the vote. Sometimes 5%, depending on the place. If it's Gary Johnson in New Mexico, then he'll get 5%. If it's, some guy in New Hampshire, he'll get 5%. If it's Florida, a highly partisan state, he'll get 1%. And if he does more than 1 or 1.2% in Florida in a governor's race, for example, or a senator's race, he's doing amazingly. The stakes are too high to stray too far from the major parties where the illusion of power actually resides. And the people never will circle the wagons and go with the established party, hoping that they'll get something tactically that's better than going with the new guy. But they'll send the new guy to Europe. Because, just send him to Europe. Let him learn something. So it's really interesting. So that's the situation, right? So as we approach the European parliamentary elections, as we approach the end of the Brexit process, the EU is going to have to either cave or go hard Brexit. And if they go hard Brexit, it's lose-lose for the EU at this point. Salvini knows it, and he's going to go, and he's going for the jugular. And this is exactly what he needs to do. All right, let's open it up for questions. JM Richatelli, what up? What up, dude? Absolutely. From one guinea to another. I hope everything's well. All right, let's get back to Dragon M's question about the sanctions, because this is a really good one. The sanctions question is going to happen after the European parliamentary elections. I'm not sure when. I think they come up for some of them come up in July. I think it's July for a year last year. So think about that. What happens at the European parliamentary elections will determine what happens with Russian sanctions in July. I would imagine it's July. There may be some in April, or there's a series of them that have gone into effect. The major ones were the ones over Crimea. I think they're July. If the Italians and the Eurosceptics take charge, or even come close and scare the daylights out of the Soros set, for lack of a better term, the Davos set, for lack of a better term. It can get really interesting. I think they're probably done either way. And for two reasons. One, to stick it in the eye of Soros and company. No, we vote no. End them. Trump loses his mind. Everybody goes nuts. The neocons fulminate and, soil themselves and the whole 9 yards. And it's all and it'll be terrible all day long. Or, as somebody put it up, as somebody else commented, I think it was them. It was the same person. That Stoyanovich says he thinks that Germany will not fight the end of the Russian sanctions. They'll use that as an excuse to let them die and let the Italians take the heat for doing so. But they really want them done as well as everybody, as well as the Italians do. Most of the countries want the sanctions to end, and no one has the balls to go against Germany. So Germany needs to lose some power here. And I think if you send a Eurosceptic, a German Eurosceptic coalition, or contingent that's 17 to 20% of the vote. Of the MEPs, I think that erodes Merkel's power base significantly. And I think it'll actually get done. What would likely cause the Italy to withdraw from the EU? DTF, I really think that's a long way off. I don't think that that's the plan at this point. I think the plan at this point is to try and reform the EU finance rules and the ECB's mandate first. And then if nothing can get done from that, then they may have to leave. But getting control of their gold reserves, at least from a legal perspective first, and then possibly a possession perspective second, are moves in that direction. Elva Caro reminds me that I should read a EU doc titled A Global Strategy for the European Union's Foreign and Security Policy. They want a global empire, and this tells you that. I know they want a global empire. I'm not saying that I shouldn't read the thing, Elva Caro, but I am saying that I know this. I know that's exactly what they want. And they're trying to destroy the United States and then consolidate all the power post-United States in Europe. That's not going to work. It's not going to work. I think what they were hoping for is that they could bankrupt the southern half of Europe, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Spain, the rest of them, and then consolidate all the power, which is a kind of what they're doing right now, trying to consolidate all the power while everybody is suffering under all this debt, and then go for the jugular and go full Orwell. I don't know that that's going to work, and I really do think that at a certain level, that Brexit's got them flat-footed. They don't know how to deal with Brexit. I think that Eastern Europe has got them by the balls as well. And I think that long-term, Putin doesn't want to see any of that either. So it'll be interesting. Yes, the Germans are getting annoyed with the attempts to tamper with Nord Stream 2. The end of Russian sanctions solves that issue. I agree. But, then Trump is serious about cutting them off from the dollar. Now, I think that's stupid, and I think it's cutting off your nose to spite your face, but, Donald Trump on trade policy, it's not like he's fucking brilliant or anything. So, dude, I'm not sure that I have that much. El Beccaro, I'm not sure I really have the capacity at this point to read something that depressing. I mean, the idea that these odious, effete, Marxist, childless fucking retards, and I mean that word exactly how I used it, think that they should be running a technocratic world empire and rule Latin America. These arrogant, worthless drunkards. No. I don't have any patience for this whatsoever. I'm sorry. People like Juncker think this way because they're allowed to get away with it. It's not going to last for very much longer. It truly isn't. China's not going to let this happen. I'm telling you. when the whole thing lets loose, they're going to be left holding their freaking plans like, Ozymandias. Look on all my works in despair. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. That's what the EU is going to look like in 5 years. I know you hate them as much as I do, dude. I know. It's good to be, it's good to be in like-minded company. I'm sorry. I don't give a fuck that this is an echo chamber. Inbred chinless wonders may be more politically correct, huh? I never said I was politically correct. I never said I was a nice guy either. That's not my gig. So, all right, let me see if I did see the thing about Walter Jones today. That's sad. Walter, in the end, Walter really did do yeoman's work. He was one of the few people to work strongly and side by side with Ron Paul once it became clear to him after 9/11 that 9/11 was not about protecting the country, and the Patriot Act was not about protecting the country. It was all about power. Walter, the man went from freedom fries to really redeeming himself very, very quickly. So, all right. All right, what else we got? No one really likes China. I'm not saying that I do either. I'm just telling you that at Ryu 6 says he doesn't like China. Well, I don't like China either, but I'm just looking at the way the world is laid out, and I'm looking at the game board, and I'm looking at the flow of capital, and I'm looking at the trends, and look at what's going on in DC. Do you see solutions possible there? I don't. I just don't. And therefore, it's going to get ugly. And it's going to get a load worse before it gets better here. All right. What do you think about them? So, Koopa Zarek, what do you think about them celebrating Marx at the European Union Parliament meeting? Not surprised. I mean, I think it would be hard. Anybody would be hard pressed to say that they would be surprised. They are all Marxist. They always have been. They will be until they die. Most of them are childless, and that makes it really easy for them to be Marxist because they don't have any skin in the fucking game, and everything exists up here in their head, and they don't actually feel anything. Yep. So, unless they can turn Russia around, says WDM, the European globalists will go to the mat on the Euro project. Yes. The U.S. is no longer reliable, so they need existentially a grand coalition facing East, and they're not going to get it from Russia. The Russians will be happy to sell them gas. They're going to hold on to, I think they're going to try and hold on to their Atlanticist fifth column in Russia for as long as possible. The Medvedevs, the Nabalinas, and the rest of them. I can't think of any of the names off the top of my head right now. Putin stands athwart all that. And Medvedev is slowly coming around to realizing that these people are evil. And they don't have Russia's best interest at heart. So I don't see that happening. What I see the Russians doing is stitching the entire world together through gas pipelines and saying, look, we're going to have peace one way or the other, and you people are not going to... you are not going to rules lawyer me into a bad deal. I'll just cut the fucking gas off. Tom, do I have comments on the article about Admiral Richardson and Gavin Williamson? Both are calling for a first strike on Russia. I think they're snorting coke for breakfast or something. Yeah, they've gone full on crazy. Gavin Williamson is completely out of his depth. This is British intelligence running an anti-Russian campaign to the full extent that they can. They're insane. And Williamson's not going to be around very much longer, I don't think. Brexit is going to sweep a lot of Tories out of the party. And if Theresa May gets the hard Brexit I'm thinking, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens after all this. There absolutely, WDM, there absolutely is an EU army coming, or at least they're going to try. But I don't know that Italy, I don't know that countries like Italy are going to stand for it for very much longer. So, is it possible to elect Salvini types to state level positions like governor and state legislature? Of course it is. Do you see any of them stepping up? Here's the big question for the United States, and this is the question that Martin Armstrong keeps asking all the time. Who comes after Trump? Why the fuck would anybody want to be president in this shit show? Why would anybody want to be governor in this shit show? Why would anybody want to go to the Senate in this shit show? Unless you were trying to profit off this shit show. Why would any man of conscience think that it would be worth going? Dustin and Halsey make this point all the time. Trump has rolled over on all of his freaking friends. Nobody worth the shit's going to go work for him. So you can't expect a better policy regime to come out of him anytime soon. Until something changes. The British deep state is worse than the American deep state. They're like the whole point. They're like the whole freaking problem at this point. Timoshenko promises to return Crimea to Ukraine. Chalk it up to unattainable election promises or campaign promises. What else is new? Yeah, the Russians and the Chinese are playing the EU perfectly. Right. That's why they're going to lose. That's why these guys in Europe are going to lose. Now, Stoyanovich, you're absolutely right. The Russians understand that they have the energy hammer. Europe has no energy unless we're talking, unless it's, thorium energy, thorium batteries or cold fusion or any of this shit's real, which I just don't want to, I can't. To me, it just sounds like science fiction. I'm sorry. I'm not that good a physicist to know if any of it's real or not. But I do know that at this point in time, oil and gas are the world that we have. And they're going to be the world we have for at least the next generation or two. Because nothing's going to change that dynamic. And the Russian, unless the Europeans are all of a sudden going to unveil the 0-point energy module, which breaks Russia's energy monopoly, not monopoly, but energy hold over them. The Europeans don't produce enough energy for themselves. There's not enough friggin' solar power in the world. They could blanket the whole fucking country in solar panels, and it still wouldn't be enough power to run the German economy. So between OBOR and the Russian diplomatic corps running pipelines all over the world, literally everywhere you look. Did you guys see the news from Serbia? You did if you read this month's Goats and Guns newsletter, because I talked about it for a long time, and my partner and I went back and forth because that article took us like 3 days to get into any kind of shape, because I really kind of shat the bed on the first draft of it. It wasn't particularly good. Guy Verhofstadt is awful. He's just, he's almost as bad as Donald Tusk. So I got my email boxes coming. I just hit Zero Hedge, so I'm just like, but there's all these emails coming in. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything important while I'm doing this. So, let's see. What else do we got? 2 words for Williamson: hypersonic missiles. Exactly. If they try anything, there's a lot of British people going to get sunk. A lot of British ships are going to get sunk instantly. The British still think that they have like a really good intelligence service, and they probably do. And they think at some level that they're still relevant, and they're not. They really need to stop. And the truth of the matter is that Brexit was the British people's way of saying, look, we're not a world player anymore. We're done. Let us get control of our own stuff. Let's stop playing it in sandbox boxes that are too big for us, and let's get realistic about what our future holds. U.S. Admiral Richardson is nutso. And with the EU is abandoning all forms of nuclear power, which is why they're now having to go buy unbelievable amounts of gas. So I didn't mean to tease anything about Serbia, but here's one for you. Serbia last week and Bulgaria both have now greenlit the first European stage of the Turk Stream pipeline. So you get the first two trains are being built, coming into Turkey, and they're into the first one goes to Turkey. There could be up to 4 of them, for fuck's sake, and 3 of them are supposed to go to Europe, and those 3 together are nearly as much as Nord Stream 2. They're each 15.75 BCMs a year, or billion cubic meters per year. 4 of them together is 68.75. Nobody's talking about this. The Russians are. The Russians are saying, look, Turk Stream could be 4 trains. We've got 2 we got 2 built, and we could build 2 more in no time flat. I mean, it only took us a year to build the fucking pipeline under the Baltic, the Black Sea in the first place. The Black Sea in the first place. We can do this. So Serbia, across Bulgaria, into Serbia, terminating at the Hungarian border. And the Hungarians are trying to decide whether or not they're going to buy some of that gas. They are. They're also, by the way, at the same time, trying to keep Trump happy by negotiating with ExxonMobil to open up, Romanian Black Sea assets and run a pipeline from there across Romania and into Hungary as well. The Italians want Russian gas. They want a thing off of Nord Stream 2, off of Turk Stream. They want one for themselves going across Greece. Serbians just are building a freaking just built a big rail line from the Greek port of Piraeus to Hungary, to Budapest. They're stitching that whole area together. And we're still playing around with trying to wrench Macedonia away and make it part of NATO. It's just all fucking these guys are still fighting the last war. That's the thing here. They're fighting the last war. Jabba's soapbox. The EU wants to reduce emissions while letting in millions more people. It's a square circle. It's even worse than that. So, yes. Well, yeah, okay, WDM, I take it back. Yeah, all the greedy Wall Streeters, neocons, deep state criminals are all chomping at the bit to work for Trump. Yeah, not anybody with a conscience. Not anybody with a soul. Psychopaths want to work for Trump. El Vaquero, breeder reactors plus using the energy to manufacture liquid fuels is the only feasible tech that could possibly be developed in the near term to get off of oil and gas. I agree. It's just not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, and the Russian Gen 3 and Gen 4 nuclear power plant designs are excellent. There's no potential for meltdowns. They're really, really well-designed things. I think you should look into them. I did research into them a few years ago and was really impressed with the Russians' technology. Which is why Rosatom is selling dozens of them. It's why the Chinese are building theirs, building a bunch. It's why the Indians are building a bunch. No potential Fukushimas with those things. Thorium reactors are settled science. Agreed. But yeah, it's the whole thing is just there's so much that has to change. And, the infrastructure is just, the infrastructure is not going to change anytime soon. And it's going to take a long time for it to change. Let's see. You guys are killing it. You guys are killing it. Don't mess with the Nürburgring. That's the best part of Germany. I agree. Now, James May would disagree with you. Yes, I watch a lot of Top Gear on the Grand Tour. But yeah, the Nürburgring is fantastic. Watching cars go around the Nürburgring, oh my shit. Big fan. Big fan. The best kind of people to elect to positions of power are those who don't want it. Yeah, get them to run. Rocket Man, I think I've said this before, and I don't mean to be. I'm just being blunt now. Read chapter 10 of The Road to Serfdom. I make this recommendation all the time. Read it again. If you have read it, read it again. Understand that the very people that you want to take to the positions of power are the ones who are not attracted to those positions in the first place. They can make more money in the private sector. Two, their comparative advantage is in pleasing people's needs as opposed to satisfying their needs and lust for rule. Satisfying their lust to rule, and that's the problem. That's the fundamental problem. Why the worst get on top is simply mechanistic. It encourages the very worst types of people and gives them a home within the division of labor that they would not have otherwise. And in a hyper-financialized society like ours, the sociopath and the psychopathic traders, psychopaths are all on Wall Street. It makes perfect sense. So another reason why I believe in 100% reserve banking and, time deposits. The hamster has bumped his head too often. He talks rubbish. Yeah, I mean, he likes muscle cars. He is who he is. It's funny. I don't know if did you guys see the last? We're almost done here. So did you guys see the latest episode of the Grand Tour where Hammond goes on his rant about the horse and his wife's relationship with her horse? That was a little uncomfortable, Hammond. It's just a little uncomfortable. Yeah, it's not that it's voluntary. It's just that 100% reserve banking, meaning no levering up. Okay, right now, what the banks do, and the reason I argue for this, and the reason we Austrians argue for it, is because it's simply that there should never be multiple claims. There should never be multiple claims to the same unit of property. So when you deposit your money in a bank, right? You say you deposit $10,000 in the bank in your savings account, and you give that and you say to the bank, okay, fine, invest that. And then you take part of you invest it, you pay me 3%, and you invest it in some project that's going to pay 6%, and you get to keep the difference. And that's the way banking is supposed to run. Now, here's the problem. What the banks are allowed to do is they're allowed to take that $10,000 and lend it out 10 times because the likelihood of you going in there and asking for your $10,000 all at once is very low. And so we can lever up. We can have that. We have more, right? Now, we can have more money floating around. We can create more credit, and we can create more debt. Now, but the problem with that is that all the banks are functionally solvent, because if everybody came to the bank at the same time and asked for their deposits, the banks would be lent along and short on cash. The bank run happens, and the bank collapses because the bank doesn't have enough money to cover its obligations. And that's the whole argument. So the better thing to do, and it's immoral for the banks to do that. It's stealing. It's counterfeiting. Period. There are 10 people out there with claims to your $1,000. They lent your $1,000 out 10 times. See, on-demand deposits are also a thing that should not exist. On-demand savings should be called checking. All savings should be time deposits. You put your money in an account, and the bank takes it and gives you a return on your money as long as you contractually forego the use of your money for a certain amount of time. Which is contracted, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, whatever. The longer you give it to the bank with a guarantee that you're not going to make a claim on it, the higher the interest rate you're most likely to get. That's the way the interest rate curves are supposed to work, and this is the way it's supposed to work. What that does is induces financial discipline. Now, the modern bankers and the modern economists will all tell you, well, that's not fast enough rate of growth. No, we can do better than that. We can be more efficient than that. And no, you can't, because you're introducing an unbelievable amount of fraud into the system, which artificially lowers the price of money by lending tons of it out, and then therefore creating a malinvestment cycle that has been well defined, what we call the Austrian business cycle, which you also need to understand. So you can, again, What Has Government Done to Our Money by Murray Rothbard. There's a variety of great books out there that explain why the I love Economics for Real People by Gene Callahan, as a matter of fact. I think it's really, really well done. Great introductory primer into Austrian economics, starting with building an economy from the Robin Crusoe economy all the way up to, you know, a reasonably complex society. See, passbook savings was wrong. Passbook savings was one of those things where again, you always had access to your money. You could always go get it, right? And then we just mandated it was just another minimum wage. Well, we're going to pay savers 5.25%. As long as interest rates are, as long as the cost of money is above 8%, then that's fine. But when it wasn't, oops. So, so there it is. It's really important that you understand that I do believe in, I believe in fractional reserve bank, and I'm against fractional reserve banking for a variety of reasons. The first of which is basically moral. It's anathema to property rights. It's anathema to the sovereign consumer. Because see, in a 100% reserve system, and this is the way a lot of things work. This is the way bonds work, for example. There's no reason why why savings can't be handled in much the same way that bonds are handled. Which is to say, at the end of the day, you have a bond that's going to mature in 10 years. Right. And you either buy the bond at the discounted rate and, lend them the money now, and then they pay you a small amount of interest. And then the bond is going to mature in, say, 10 years at full value, at par. And if you trade the bond in early, you're going to get less than the full value because the bond hasn't matured yet. The other way, of course, is then there's the government debt, which is that they just pay you a coupon. You give them $10,000. And they pay you, say, 4% for 10 years, right? And at the end of the 10 years, they give you your $10,000 back, and you've been collecting your 4% coupon every year for 10 years, right? That's a time deposit. That's all that is. That's all it is. It's a time deposit. And there's nothing wrong with time deposits. I love time deposits. That's exactly the way the system should work. On-demand savings is part of the problem. Interesting. Authors of my engineering ethics book actually admit that they are anti-libertarian. What a surprise. College is definitely about exploring ideas. How do you ensure there's sufficient investment? The rate of interest. The rate of interest is the cost of money. The market will regulate the cost of money and the demand of money based on what people need. And the harder the project, the longer the time horizon, the higher the interest, the more interest rate sensitive it is. And of course, big projects want lower interest rates because they're very interest rate sensitive, because you're paying out a small amount of interest. You want to pay a small amount of interest out over a 30-year investor return, right? For example, you want to amortize the cost of building a fucking bridge across a gorge over a 30 or 50-year lifespan, right? I mean, makes sense. So you don't want to pay 6% on that if you don't have to. You want to pay, 3% if you can. But you got to find investors who are willing to accept that low rate of return for that project, or the project doesn't happen. And forcibly extracting the money at gunpoint to build the project at 3 times the cost, and then say, well, it'll be there for 100 years and we'll get a return on it, doesn't work. Double entry bookkeeping. Mises said this, it's like one of the things that, it's like, I always, I make this joke all the time. In 6 days, God created the world. On the 7th day, he rested. On the 8th day, man created money to get shit done. And on the 9th day, Mises said, hey, what about double entry bookkeeping? I mean, honestly, Mises called double entry bookkeeping one of the great wonders of the world. It's certainly one of the greatest technologies that we've ever developed, because it gives us precise understanding of our liabilities and our assets in order to understand whether the whether the thing that we're engaging in is profitable or not. Is this what we should be doing? It answers the very questions that we need to know if we're honest with ourselves. And the numbers don't lie. The numbers may not tell you something that you want to hear. Politicians are terrible at taking the advice of what the numbers fucking tell them. It's the truth. Kind of like this channel. Sometimes you're going to hear things you like, and other times you're not going to hear. You're going to hear things you fucking hate. I'm not always right, but, you know, I'll never lie to you either. So, the savings rate, the interest, see, when the savings rate is lower than demand for money, the interest rate rises. And then what happens, of course, is that if there's such a demand for money, then the lenders keep raising their fucking bids. Say, no, okay, what do you need? What do you want? 6%? 6.5%? 7%? 7.5%? 8%? What'll get it done? It's the law of supply and demand and the law of diminishing marginal utility. There comes a point where too much savings, remember, Brett, there's only two laws in economics that matter. All the other stuff is just fucking hand waving and somebody talking their freaking book. There are two laws in economics. There's the law of supply and demand, and there's the law of diminishing marginal utility. And if you understand and grok those two things in their interplay intimately, then most, if not all, of your fears about what would happen if, in an economic sense, go away. Because you'll, at that point, understand what people are going to do. The law of diminishing marginal utility states very clearly and very simply that the acquisition of the next unit of a particular good is worth less to you than the previous one. So, the man who's dying of thirst, the first sip of water is the most valuable to him. That's the one that starts to stabilize his life. The second sip, depending on how dehydrated he is, almost equally as valuable. The third sip, the fourth sip, the third glass of water, the fourth glass of water, at some point, you have so much water that you drown in it. And now it's a liability. Same thing with savings. A little is good. Some is better. A lot is, really? How much money do you need? Now, some people are irrational about it. They save everything. And they never spend anything. That's some people are like that. And other people look at the situation and go rationally and go, no, I'm gonna mobilize those. I don't need those dollars to do other things. My life is on this planet is short. If we were all immortal, it would be a different story, but we're not. Our time on this planet is very short, and the only true scarce natural resource we have is time. And time is what determines why we do what we do. MJ, this is why Bitcoin is so important. It's triple entry bookkeeping. Bingo. I love guys like that. I have never thought of it that way. Thank you. I love that line. It's triple entry bookkeeping. I'm going to use that, by the way. I'm going to steal it shamelessly. I might even give you freaking credit from time to time. So, we have, the thing about it is, Brett, is that we always have around 1% to 2% real growth anyway, and the rest of it is just froth, that we have periods of high growth and then periods of hyper low growth or negative growth, and then the whole thing kind of norms out over time to between 1% and 2%. That's it. You really can't break it down any farther than that. And it would be better for everybody if we didn't do it that way. We might be able to get more, we might be able to stay at closer to the 2% limit or the 2.5% limit, depending on, again, it depends on things. Gary North asked a question a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago, in an article. And I'm going to leave with this, okay? And this is one of the few times when that man didn't have an answer to something. But he wanted an answer, and he left it out there in a kind of early form of crowdsourcing. He said, look, if you trace back human history, now he may have been doing some hand-waving on this argument, but let's just go with his premise, because I think it's a fair premise. If you look at the most of human history, recorded human history, capital appreciates at around 1% per annum for most of human history until the early 18th century or the early 1800s. And then it starts to compound to 2%. And his question was, what the fuck happened? Well, Gary North was a strict Calvinist and didn't curse. I curse. What the fuck happened? That was the question he posed to all of his readers and all of us and all of his students, and I certainly was a student of his for years. Because he's like, is it just the gold standard? Was it just constitutional government? Was it this? Was it that? What was it? Was it oil? Or was it the confluence? In my mind, was it the confluence of all these events? We had the emergence of very strong property rights here in the United States. We had the emergence of a constitution, and we the people usurped and changed the dynamic between us and government. No longer was government sovereign over the people. For the first time, somebody wrote down a constitution in which governments were not sovereign over the people. We had thrown off the divine right of kings. That changed things. Then oil. Well, certainly the steam engine, and then oil. And then all of these things, something changed. And it's been compounding it around a real rate of around 2% ever since. And that changed everything. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. Was it the lathe allowing machines to make machines? Good question. Good question. Great insight. Green Penguin never thought of it that way. Is there a sector of the economy that sells genuine free market aspects? Yeah. Well, for many years, the computer industry. Promissory notes aren't money. We use them as currency. They're not money, though. They're not a store of value. That's the biggest problem. They're not a store of value. They're a medium of exchange, and they're a unit of account, but they're not a store of value. The dollar is not a store of value. And money, first and foremost, has to be a store of value in order to become a unit of account, in order to be used as a medium of exchange. It's the other way around. We're trying to use the dollar for all three of those things, and it doesn't work. So 100% reserve banking. Remove the fractional from fractional reserve banking. I don't know that it changed again after 1914. I think it's mostly been in place ever since. So, was it going from monarchy to most areas to elected presidents and prime ministers? Well, maybe. Is that part of it? Probably. But I think it had to do with access to energy at a great rate, and the fact that we were also entering an extended period of the sun warming. Can copper and zinc be a store of value? They're not as good because they're too useful in other ways, and they also oxidize very readily against each other too. By the way, you can't like put copper and zinc together because they form a galvanic cell. So. So, copper and zinc, no, not really stores of value. They're industrial metals. I mean, honestly, everything. The last thing, because we're at an hour and 10 now. I know we're talking heavy economics, and don't ever forget this. There is no such thing as intrinsic value. One of the things that sucks. Yes, the fractional reserve. Okay, Brett, you've got it. Fractional reserve banking amplifies the business, the highs and the lows of the business cycle, as opposed to dealing with, as opposed to the free market, which will deal with business cycles and liquidations very quickly. Think the Panic of 1857. Think Harding's massive depression of 1920-21, which was over in 18 months. Urban mining, stealing copper out of electrical yards. Yeah, absolutely. Urban mining. People stealing the copper coils out of air conditioners and shit. Yeah, it's real. When copper was really expensive, oh yeah, they did it. They did it a lot. Not saying that like copper and zinc aren't valuable. They are. They are. But there's so many other uses for them that as money, no, we're going to use them as industrial metals. And it's part of the problem with silver coming into the future. Silver is so goddamn useful about so many things. Silver is going to be completely demonetized this century. I know people are stealing gasoline because Obrador made a terrible mistake with gas. With gas, I know, but I know it's sad. All right, it's an hour and 10. My voice is starting to go, so I'm gonna kick it off here for the evening. Great talk tonight, guys. Really appreciate everybody coming by. As always a stimulating conversation. Got the best audience on YouTube, but I'm almost positive. All right, so you guys take care. We'll be back Friday night at 8:30. I'll get at least one or two small short videos out during the week. Watch and learn. That guy Salvini, he's really living up to his name. All right, you guys take care. Have a great night. Keep your stick on the ice.